Hello everybody, it's me again, and today we're just going to do a really chill video where I draw and you listen to me yap in the background. But if you would prefer to not listen, hey, no problems there, you can mute the video. But anyways, I noticed it's been a while since we did a traditional speed paint video on this channel, but hey, we're bringing that back, yay, okay. So I mainly just wanted to talk about how art has brought back my creative spark again, because I've been in a slump lately and it's just been hard for me to draw anything or have fun creating something, but writing has brought back that joy for me recently, so I wanted to talk about that. And apologies if I do ramble because I didn't really flesh out this script very well. So anyways, here's a quote I really liked and I wanted to share with you guys, which is an excerpt from Fyodor Dostoevsky's White Nights. So the quote goes like this: "Meanwhile, the soul demands and seeks out something quite other, and the dreamer vainly rakes through his old longings like ashes, seeking in those ashes at least a few sparks that might be fanned into a fire to warm his chilled heart and resurrect anew in him that which was formerly so sweet, that which touched his soul, stirred his blood, tore the tears from his eyes, and so richly deceived him." Anyways, I really like this quote because it reminds me of a time when I was a little kid and I was just drawing for fun and I was just brimming with ideas. I had such an active imagination that drawing felt so easy to me. But now when I look at a piece of paper, I'm thinking about the numerous things that can go wrong, and I haven't even started. I haven't put the pen or pencil to paper. Oh, yeah, of course my dog decides that it's the best time to interrupt me. I apologize, but you're just gonna have to deal with him, okay? Because I can't make him shut up no matter what. But yeah, as I was saying, for some reason now it's much harder for me to start drawing something. It's like I just ran out of ideas, like the well of ideas or my imagination just dried up, or maybe somebody took it from me. I don't know, but that's gone now. Anyways, but I also have thought for a long time now that my work was always lacking in some way. I mean, for an artist, you know, you will never be satisfied with your art. You're always going to want to improve or be better in some way. But I always felt that I lacked something specifically. Like in the back of my head, I just felt like there was something missing, but I couldn't exactly pinpoint what. I just knew it was there for a very, very long time now. And I would draw so many portraits. I would study color theory, study human anatomy, and I would just look for countless ways to evolve my technique as an artist. But, you know, it was always missing. Like, what was I missing? That was the big question. Until this year, as I mentioned, started working on a personal project, which is likeness, and that led me to a hobby I once thought had been long gone to with my Wattpad days in the past, which is writing. And I will admit, I am no talented writer, okay? 12-year-old me knew that she had none whatsoever, no talent for the art of putting words on paper and making it sound like eloquent and whatever, you know? So in the good old days, I would write prolifically about everything and anything. So I once wrote a story about an ice princess whose only personality was that she was a princess and she had ice powers. Of course, I wrote fan fiction. I also wrote about 100-year-old demon father and his 3 sons. One of them was Lucifer. I don't know where that idea came from, but I wrote about that. More fan fiction. I also had a weird video essay. Yes, I was the OG of video essays, but I made a video essay critiquing academia and its intellectual pursuits. So, admittedly, they weren't very good, okay? I mean, it's a 12-year-old's writing, what did you expect? But it was brimming with pure chaos, imagination, and was just so full of life, you know? I think that's why a lot of people miss their childhood days when they could just draw whatever they wanted, because it just felt alive. And back to present day, I've started writing again, yippee! And I'm working on my short story, but I also write about mini essays about topics that interest me, mostly ones exploring existentialism, mortality, love. So those are just a few of the topics that I write about, but I just really write about anything that piques my interest. Sometimes I do research and etc., but yeah, it's been fun to write, and for some reason, writing about existential dread and how joy can be so fleeting has helped me tap with my creative self in a way I didn't even know existed. So strange, because morbid topics, you know, writing about all of this depressing stuff, but somehow is making me feel alive again. Ironic. But yeah, I think writing has just helped me bring my illustrations to life or make them feel more alive, because I started thinking about the story behind them. Because when I used to just draw or illustrate, I would just think about things from a technical perspective, right? Like, would the composition look good? Would the shape design go well with that? What colors would help the viewer draw their eye to a focus of the portrait, or like the focus of the art piece itself? I never really considered about giving my illustrations or drawings a story behind them. But because I've been writing, and because I've been illustrating pieces that has had to make me think about how I can portray this character's personality through this piece, or how I can add in little tidbits or tiny details that sort of intertwine with the message or the story, it's made me more creative for some reason. But that's something that I've always felt has been lacking in my artwork, and I'm only just realizing it now. And a lot of my favorite artists that I look up to, like Latans, Emily Xu, Night Zhang, Rifuhata Belingshi, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, and Irie Pan, they're my favorite artists, and that's for a good reason. Because when you look at their art, it stirs something inside you whenever you look at their work, because it feels alive, it's inviting, it makes you want to linger, to search for the story hidden in the colors and lines. And that's what makes their art so captivating, is because there's an element of storytelling that I lacked, and it only has just clicked now, which is so mind-boggling. Like, it was right in front of me. How? Like, such a simple thing. I did not see it, but you know, that's when I realized, oh, you know, this was what I've been missing all along. I wanted to tell a story, and I'd forgotten about that. So pretty much giving myself the space to put my thoughts into words has helped me picture spaces, emotions, and characters much more vividly. Writing has also made it easier for me to come up with illustration ideas, or setting scenes, and even picking colors that capture a certain mood. But what I love most is how it's made creating feel exciting for me again. I catch myself enjoying little things, even like wondering how this character might hold a pencil, or how they drink their coffee in a specific moment. And getting lost in those tiny details has really brought a whole new kind of joy to making art, and I'm super grateful that I decided to get back into writing again. But anyways, yeah, that's my whole little ramble on how writing has made me more creative. on the topic of writing, since we're already on that topic, I wanted to talk about some of my favorite literature lately. So I've been reading a lot of classic lit, if you couldn't tell from the Dostoevsky quote. But yeah, I've been reading a lot of the classics, and I've had my favorites so far, so I just want to share some of that with you guys. One of my favorites that I've read recently is Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger. Now, this is one of those books where I didn't really love it after I read it. I enjoyed it for sure. It was a great book to read, but when I finished reading it, I wasn't like, oh, it's my favorite book now. No, it wasn't like that. It took a bit of time for the message to really sink in and incubate. And after reading a lot of people's perspectives or thoughts on the book and why they liked it so much, it made me love the book even more. So now it's become one of my favorites. So it took a while to become a favorite of mine. Anyways, one of my favorite parts of the book is where, what was his name? Yeah, Zoe, I think that's how you say it. Zoe tells Franny when she's having her breakdown, she tells her about shining your shoes for the fat lady. And I feel like it's just so hard to explain this unless you've read the book. It's one of those, if you know, you know. You'll get it if you read it. But the best way for me to explain it is Franny has a nervous breakdown because she gets sick of performing for the sake of ego or for the sake of pleasing an audience or receiving praise. And basically, she becomes disillusioned with acting in college because everyone seems to be a phony that just wants to make it big somehow. And she shows her clear distaste for college life in general, especially with her boyfriend Elaine when he talks about his paper getting published and how people go to college just for the sake of getting knowledge, but none of it really results in real wisdom. Essentially, they just do it for the clout, is the TLDR of that. And so she starts turning to religion for some enlightenment, and she obsesses over this book called The Pilgrim's Way, which describes the Jesus prayer, and she becomes obsessed over that prayer in hopes of attaining spiritual enlightenment. Basically just a solution to her mental breakdown. And then later on the story, Zoe comments on how Franny's search for spirituality is just as egotistical as what everyone else is doing, because he describes, ego as something like treasure is treasure. So there's a quote, a really nice quote that I also like, where he says, as a matter of simple logic, there's no difference at all that I can see between the man who's greedy for material treasure or even intellectual treasure, and the man who's greedy for spiritual treasure. As you say, treasure's treasure. God damn it. It seems to me that 90% of all the world-hating saints in history were just as acquisitive and unattractive, basically, as the rest of us are. So, yeah. Basically, that's what Zoe is saying, that she's just as egotistical as everyone else, as Franny describes the phonies in her college. But what I really like about the ending, and when Franny gets this enlightenment from Zoe telling her to shine your shoes for the fat lady. I'm so sorry, I cannot explain it any better than this. I'm really bad at telling the story, but whatever. But the ending basically tells us that no one is a terrible person. We can be just as good as everyone else. And what Zoe is telling Franny is to be optimistic and to just live a life of love without judgment and narcissism. And whatever she chooses to do, she can choose to do it for God if she wants it to, or for the fat lady, or whatever she chooses to believe in. And basically just enjoy what she's doing. Just do it for yourself and enjoy what you're doing, really, is the entire message. But I like how the message was given to us through these two characters and their dialogue, and You know, both the characters are just so interesting, Zoe in particular. And I don't know, J.D. Salinger has such a unique writing style, especially when it comes to dialogue, because there's always going to be either "God damn it" in the dialogue, or they're either going to be smoking cigarettes, or both in the same sentence. Like, it's just not J.D. Salinger if, you know, that's not in the dialogue. But that was one of my favorites. Another one of my favorites, as I mentioned earlier in the video, was actually White Nights by Fyodor Dostoevsky. White Nights is also one of those books where I was like, like, I thought this book was really interesting, was really nice. The ending is tragic, but I thought it was a beautiful story, but I don't think it's a favorite. Until, yeah, the same thing with Franny and Zoe, until I gave it some time to process. I thought about it, I journaled about it, and then I read, you know, people's thoughts on it, and I was like, I think I'm starting to love this short story. It's not a book, sorry, it's a short story. Like, I think I'm really starting to love this short story. It might be one of my favorite short stories by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So the reason why this short story is called White Nights is in reference to a phenomenon that happens in Petersburg. It's also called the midnight twilight, and this is an occurrence where the sun doesn't set fully, which makes the nights bright. So it doesn't look like it's nighttime at all, it just looks like it's still morning or noon. But what made me love this short story even more was the metaphor for how joy is just so fleeting in the story. And that's because the main character, I forget his name. What's his name? I don't know. I don't think he had a name, but basically our main character is this guy. He's been lonely for a very, very long time until he meets a girl, right? And basically it's a love story between these two. Okay, it's a love story, but it's tragic, like I said, because, well, you know, if you don't want to be spoiled, like, please skip. I'm gonna give you a few seconds, like, click off or mute the video. But anyways, I'm gonna continue. It's tragic because the girl has a lover that she's been waiting for a while, and in the end she leaves the guy for her lover, because even though they promised each other, oh, we're gonna be together forever, but in truth they actually didn't love each other. They were just really, really lonely people, and they were desperate for human contact. And so in the end the girl leaves for her lover, and the guy is obviously devastated. And in the ending he says, my god, a moment of bliss, why isn't that enough for a whole lifetime? And this short story is just chef's kiss, because the White Nights metaphor is just beautifully done and portrayed through the story of how the guy meeting the girl, oh, I remember her name, Nastenka, how the guy meeting Nastenka is like a fleeting moment of light in the main character's life. It's a temporary reprieve from his loneliness, which is why he says that line in the ending, like, a moment of bliss, that's all it was, and that's enough, you know. And joy is just so fleeting sometimes, but you know, that's enough. Oh my god, yes. There's actually one more that I need to talk about, and I really need to tell this to someone, so I'm gonna, you know, just tell it to you, because I doubt anyone else will listen to me talk about this. You don't have to listen, okay? Just reminding you. But I also read Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre. I don't know how to speak French, I'm sorry, but yeah, I read his book Nausea because I read his play No Exit, which is very famous for the quote, hell is other people. So I decided to read No Exit, and I enjoyed it, so I decided to read Nausea, right? Okay, but what was so crazy is that in the book there is this scene where Okay, before I talk about the scene specifically, let me just explain the book. The book is basically about existentialism, and the story doesn't really make much sense unless you are knowledgeable about the philosophy of existentialism. Can't pronounce that, but basically you have to be knowledgeable about that philosophy to some extent in order to actually comprehend this book, because it's not much about the story, it's about the philosophy of how life is absurd and nothing really matters. And I feel like the philosophy of existentialism is beautifully portrayed through our main character Antoine, but this book really nauseated me quite literally towards the ending, which I felt was just so unnecessary and just really threw me off, and I couldn't bring myself to even finish this book anymore. But there's a scene towards the ending of the book where the self-taught man, so there's this guy called the self-taught man, which is kind of like our main character's quote-unquote friend, but not really friend. So this self-taught man, right, he's called the self-taught man because he likes to teach himself literature and all that. He goes to the library and reads. And so in this part of the story, he's going to the library, and then he sits down beside, there's this little boy that decides to sit beside him, right? And they're talking for a while, and it all seems innocent until the self-taught man touches the boy's hand. And the boy is very horrified at this and runs away. And there's other people in the library that see this, and this one man who they call the Coruscant man sees this, and he's outraged. He confronts the self-taught man about this and then punches him in the face in the heat of the moment. And the lady that was also there agrees that he had been going to the library for a long time now and doing that same thing. So the self-taught man leaves, but for some goddamn reason, Antoine goes up to the Coruscant man and confronts him as if he's getting angry on the self-taught man's behalf. And I'm confused, cause bro, why are you like defending a pedophile? They don't get into a scuffle, they don't fight, but Antoine just leaves. And then he catches up with the self-taught man and he's like, we should get you patched up, there's like a pharmacy. I'm like, bro, what are you doing? I'm like disgusted, right? So anyways, more about the self-taught man, interestingly, is that he's a so-called humanist. So there's a point in the book where he converses with Antoine about his love, quote-unquote love for humanity and how he can't help but love everyone. But after that scene, I realized that to me, it just feels like he found an excuse or way of intellectualizing his pedophilia, and his framework of humanism is just complete baloney, complete falsehood. There is no love for humanity. He's just a pedophile, and it makes me even more sick that Antoine defended him. Okay, and on that note, I got into the deep end, right, about Jean-Paul Sartre and this whole scene on the book, because it made me question why he even needed to add that into the story. Like, it was so unnecessary. You didn't need this scene. Like, why would you add that? So I got into this rabbit hole of Jean-Paul Sartre and some of his questionable beliefs. But basically in 1977 and 1979, several petitions were actually signed by a number of prominent French intellectuals, doctors, and psychologists, calling for reforms or abolition of the French age of consent law. And in January 1977, they published a petition in the Le Monde which criticized the affaire des Versailles. I don't know, for the detention of detention of 3 men arrested for sex offenses against children aged 12 to 13. So they called for the decriminalization of pedophilia. Crazy. And you know who signed this letter? You know, it was signed by this petition was signed by nearly 70 people, including Michael Foucault, Simone de Beauvoir, Jean-Paul Sartre, Gilles Enfant Deluge, Félix Guattari, and many other psychiatrists, sociologists, and all the philosophers, which is crazy. I don't know why. But I must also mention that the 3 men who were arrested for sex offenses were also friends of Michael Foucault, and I believe also Simone de Beauvoir. In an interview, Michael Foucault also defended the petition, saying, this is how I interpreted what he said, okay? This is basically what it sounded to me. But he said that the new penal system sexualizes children by the mere fact that the law insinuates the child has its own sexuality that the adult must not enter. He says that it establishes a concept of sexuality between child and adult, which makes it questionable, which is basically, to me, his way of intellectualizing and making excuses for pedophilia, and it is a roundabout way of saying, yes, I support pedophiles. And to mention also, we have Vanessa Springora, who is the 14-year-old victim of Gabriel Mansneff. He is a scumbag who I believe is still living to this day, you know. She was his victim, who was age 49 at the time, and in January 2020 she actually published a book called La Consentement, or Consent, which I hope to get to. That's enough rambling from me for now. I mean, I had fun yapping. If you didn't like listening to this, okay, sorry, not sorry. You could have just muted it or like played music. But yeah, you decided to listen anyways. Thanks so much for supporting the channel, for watching my silly videos. But I'll hopefully see you in another one. Bye!